Ifemina, can you see the screen now? Please confirm.
Yes, we can see your screen, Prof. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So actually, is how acting criminal law together fields. And I friend Dr. Bello is on call, and also the learned sick, Mrs. Funke Adekoya. So I believe from their intervention, there will be takeaway for me as well. So this is the overview of my presentation. I look at the objective of the presentation, then we look at some definition, then clarify some terms. Then we look deeply within the time available on the legal framework for tax clearance certificate. Then we look for argument for, because there are protagonists of what we are trying to discuss this afternoon. There are people who are pushing it very hard. So what are they saying? What is the reason for their position? Then we look for argument against. Then what are the findings? Then I will leave you with a few questions just to reflect on, questions to muse on after the conversation. Then I'll make just 3 recommendations. Then the objective of this presentation 1 is to let us look backward and ask ourselves, when did this begin in the Nigerian judicial and tax space? Where did it originate from? And then we interrogate the legal basis in the context of tax law. That is important. So my colleagues who are experts on criminal matters can tell us whether there is justification for it in criminal law jurisprudence. But my position is that there is no justification for it whatsoever in the context of the Nigerian tax law. And I will make this plain in the course of my presentation. Then I hope to articulate fresh arguments, which hopefully will enrich the conversation and also advocacy towards the abolition of this practice without delay. Then suggest practical way forward. So I begin with the introduction. By a circular of 27th May 2014, the former CJ of Ondo State issued a circular which stated that every surety in a bail application must present a tax certificate covering a year. And I quoted it because this is not in tandem with what the tax law provides or provided at that time. So which must be from Ondo State Board of Internal Revenue. What followed? MBA boycotted the courts and they actually embarked on a demonstration. So this was reported in the Punch newspaper, which I've quoted here. Then according to the MBA, it cost 75,000 for a certificate of 1 surety. So where you have 2 sureties, the family member of the accused will be looking at 150. So they had reasons to actually protest. But some people will say, oh, is this the manner that lawyers should protest? But anyway, I tried to interrogate the possible undercurrent. What could have happened? I mean, what could have given rise to that circular? And I can only hazard a guess. I'm not sure. This is not a matter of tax law. I said, I can see the governor at that time or the chairman of the state board talking to the CJ and saying, look, we are broke or we need more money. Most of the things you wanted could be solved if we have more money. So they wanted the buy-in of the head of court as partner in progress, good or bad. You'll be the judge later on. So the practice, unfortunately, is now so entrenched. It has become almost peremptory in most states, including Ondo states. However, with significant reduction of the cost or price of TCC, and I put those in quotes because of the implication. However, beyond the right to liberty and prison congestion angle, the practice, in my view, implicates more fundamental issues, such as the autonomy of judiciary, on which there is convergence between the bar, the bench, and the stakeholders. So that is an important issue, which makes this very topical and also very important conversation. So I now look at definition and clarification of terms. I won't waste too much time on this so that I can dive into the tax issue. Bail, all lawyers have a good understanding of what bail is about, but because this is a conversation involving non-lawyers, let's just take a simple look at it. Bail is to procure the release of an accused person on the condition that the person will return to court at some specified time to answer the charges against him or her. So we are going to focus on court bail and bail awaiting trial for bailable offenses. So other types of bail will be out of scope. So bail is predicated on fundamental constitutional imperatives, out of which I highlighted just 3: right to personal liberty, fair hearing, and presumption of innocence. And I've reproduced the provisions of the Constitution and the Administration of Criminal Justice Act in this regard. I won't bother to go through this so that we can get to the real meat of the discussion as quickly as possible. So these are the provisions, okay? Now, what do we mean by, okay, this is important. This is important. You see, conditions of bail. Condition of bail. Bail is not granted as a matter of course, okay? The grant of bail to an applicant is not automatic. It depends on the discretionary power of the court. And I put discretionary power, I highlighted it for a purpose. And these are the things the judge or the court will usually take into consideration: the nature of the charge, the strength of the evidence in support of the charge, the seriousness of the punishment, in which the seriousness of the punishment in the event of conviction, the previous criminal record of the accused. You see a recidivist, if any, the probability of that the accused may not surrender himself for trial. That particularly is important in the context of our discussion. Then the likelihood of the accused interfering with witnesses or suppressing any evidence that may incriminate him. Now, let me quickly go to sureties. Sureties. In ordinary parlance, a surety is one who is liable for the debt or obligation of another. In the context of this paper, it is a person who takes responsibility to ensure the appearance of the accused as at when required by the court. So I also quoted the provision of the ACJ law of Lagos State on bail and conditions of bail. Then I quickly go to bond person. Bond person are like sureties. They may either be a private or corporate entity licensed to practice within a particular jurisdiction. So Section 138(1) of ACJ law of Lagos gives the CJ the power to make regulations for the registration and licensing of bondsmen. So we have Bondsmen Regulation 2011. Basically, it's a commercial venture around the opportunities relating to bail in court and all that. So it involves payment of fees in exchange for services. So it may be new in Nigeria or Lagos, but it actually dated back to the 13th century England, where the elites of business people felt that there was a gap, and they tried to fill it by setting up regulation on how bondsmen will operate. So it's mostly affordable to limited number of people, just like any luxury good or service. So to my knowledge, the provision of Section 138 of ACJ law and also these regulations are yet to be operationalized in Lagos. I may be wrong. Then tax regime, what does it mean? It encompasses the process and outcome of tax policy formulation, lawmaking, administrations, including enforcement and dispute resolution. In the wider context, courts are also involved in the tax system because ultimately, if there is dispute, parties may resort to appeal and later go to the regular court. So what do we mean by administration of criminal justice? It applies to criminal law, the substantive law, enforcement by the police and other agencies, the judicial process, prisons to correctional centers, protection and balancing of civil liberties of people across the spectrum against that of the state. Now, what do we mean by prison decongestion? To decongest basically means to evacuate, to reduce the volume or number in a space. So basically, when applied to prison, it means measures designed to reduce the number of prisoners in the Nigerian system. So judicial notice, I believe, can be taken of the custodial environment of the Nigerian prison, and that we have the prisons busting scene with people who are awaiting trial. And that is why the high net worth individual try all means possible to be remanded in some other custodial spaces apart from prisons. They will slum in the court, they will arrange medical certificates and all that, because seeing what is going on in those spaces alone can kill. You may enter the correctional center ill and healthy, only to come out with incurable disease. We have cases of big political players who have come out with blindness, full or partial. So it's a real issue. So now, we now go to the legal analysis of tax clearance certificate. This, I believe, is the meat of my presentation. So I will be slow here a bit. Now, we begin with the Constitution, which is the broad norm. The Constitution says in Section 24F, every citizen has a duty to declare his income honestly to the appropriate and lawful agency and pay his tax promptly. A lot of people have put spin on this and sent the provision on an errand or deploy it towards achievement of objective for which it was never meant. What this meant, in my view, is that the tax system is supposed to be designed in such a space that nobody escapes payment of tax, because the forefathers of the Nigerian Constitution envisaged that the public space, The public sector will be financed largely by tax revenue, not oil revenue. If we have operationalized this, we could have put all our oil revenue in a future account or some sovereign wealth accounts, as some other nations are doing. But unfortunately, here we are. So now I go to section 85, and I've tried to break it down. And these are the main rules under that provision, section 85 of PITA, Personal Income Tax Act. The assessment is important for the analysis I'm going to make later, because this is a tax concept. The assessment of the 3 years preceding the year of assessment must have been fully paid, or no tax is due. So this is speaking to circumstances or situation where a taxpayer is assessed. So TCC is issued for the 3 years immediately preceding the current year of assessment. It means if I need or require a TCC in this year, it will relate to my tax affairs in 2018, 2019, and 2020. Okay? So the fact that the current year tax had not been paid is not a reason why TCC should not be granted, because it is retrospective. So TCC shall be issued within 2 weeks of demand. Did I hear somebody say this is a wooden lie? Within 2 weeks of demand. For, with respect to any of the transactions, and also verify the genuineness by referring same to the issuing tax authority. Then this is what the TCC will contain: chargeable income. All these are legal concepts in tax law and practice. Chargeable income, tax payable, tax paid, tax outstanding, and or alternatively, a statement to the effect that no tax is due. Then the transaction is in respect of which, a ministry, again, department, agency, or a commercial bank shall request for TCC are clearly stated. And I've stated them copiously in this and next slide. I want you to please take note of the ones that are in bold. Please take note of the ones, for example, registration of motor vehicles. So the ones that are in bold are the ones where the ministries, departments, agency have on their own come to the conclusion that requesting for TCC in these circumstances is just not realistic. Okay, let's look at it. And I want you to pay attention to the nature. These are some of the things that there are people who will never engage in these transactions in their lifetime. In fact, majority of the people will never go near them. Okay, application for government loan for industry or business, registration of motor vehicles, application for firearm license. I don't know whether you have firearms. I don't. Application for foreign exchange and exchange control permission to remit fund outside Nigeria. Application for certificate of occupancy. There are people who own lands that have become debt capital because the conditions for processing certificate of occupancy is easier than a camel passing through the eye of the needle. Despite all the interventions, 30-minute consent and all that. Even if they had worked for some time, they have not worked on a sustainable basis. And it is not rocket science. Application for award of contracts by government, its agencies, and registered companies. Application for approval of building plans. Application for trade license. Application for transfer of real property. Application for import or export license. Application for agent license. Application for pool or gaming license. Application for registration as a contractor. Application for distributorship. Then, confirmation of appointment by the government as chairman or member of a public board, institution, commission, company, or any other similar position made by government. Political appointments. Stamping of guarantor's form for a Nigerian passport. That should also be in bold. I don't know what happened. Actually, I bolded it, but so please note P. Application for registration of company, also notes Q when you register company. I may be wrong, but I don't think this is realistic, especially when you are talking about one-day registration and all that. So application for allocation of market stalls, application or election into public office. This is also bolding. S, you see that courts have liberalized that provision. And they have said that it cannot override the provision of the Constitution. Application for plots of land. Then this is important. Any other transactions as may be determined from time to time. So anytime government extends requirement of TCC to anything, we always think, oh, it's pursuant to that omnibus provision. But a lot of people have never taken time to look at the entire provisions on TCC and then interrogate who has power to do what. Okay, who has power to do what? Now, repatriation of funds to a non-resident recipient and all that. So there are offenses, giving of incorrect information, obtaining the TCC through misrepresentation, forgery or falsification and all that. On conviction, attracts a penalty of 50,000 plus twice the amount in issue, or imprisonment for 3 years. You can see that it can be a serious issue. And some people have actually gone to jail on account of this. I remember during the chairmanship of Ms. Ifeko Omoigui, that extraordinary lady who did so much for the Nigerian taxpayers. She wanted to actually make scapegoat of some people, and she did. Because people this just became a business center for some people, and then they were just pleasing government. And she sent very strong signal that it can't be business as usual. So failure, this is important. Failure to enforce Section 85(2). That is failure of ministries, department, agencies, and the banks. On conviction, a fine of 5 million or an imprisonment for 3 years, or both. I don't know whether this has ever been enforced. And also, the cases that I mentioned earlier where TCC are no longer required, I don't think there has been any consequence. So our magistrates and our judges should not be afraid that anything will happen. So if a magistrate or a head of court decide to say no, I'm persuaded that this is not lawful. No harm, nobody is going to come and prosecute anybody for anything. So what I did here is to now take stock of the various tax cases relating to qualification of election and also the attitude of courts. So I've provided here about 7 cases. I've been following development of tax cases since I became a lecturer, and I've been reporting all these cases since 1922. So this is the reason why I can treat you to about 7 cases. There would have been more, but time will not. Now, these are the cases. I don't want to bore the non-lawyers on call about each of these cases, but what we can distill from them are this. The proper body to establish whether tax is paid as at when due is the Board of Inland Revenue. So only the relevant tax authority can furnish admissible evidence of. So if a contestant who lost approaches the court on the basis that, oh, this man did not pay tax. So they have been faced with a decision that, look, you are not the one to tell us whether somebody had paid tax or not. If we don't have the state board here to tell us what you are telling us, it is hearsay and we can't believe you. What is the implication of this? Then a court is not entitled to speculate on the income of a taxpayer where the tax authority is satisfied that the proper tax had been issued. Here they are saying that, look, if a tax board issued a TCC, even for a minimal or a ridiculous amount, a contestant cannot dispute it on the basis that, oh, this man ought to have paid much more. Okay? So the tax authority is vested with jurisdiction to verify the genuineness of any tax and not the court. So the court even lacks jurisdiction. So whatever they put before the court must take. Then a civil servant is deemed to have paid his tax as at when due, since tax is deducted by government at source. Then the production of tax payments means production of personal income tax. There are different types of taxes. For example, everybody is an expert on VAT now. So what we are talking about here has nothing to do with VAT debate. It's focused on personal income tax. So proof of service of assessment is a precondition for proving non-payment of tax. However, this has been changed since the self-assessment regime. Then the onus of proof that tax was not paid as at when due is on the person making the allegation. Then in a particular case, it was said that a tax receipt bears a date which falls on a working day does not make tax receipts and does not make the TCC false or a fake. That's the case of Ipeasu. Okay, this case, Dr. Okezie Victor Ipeasu and Dr. Samson Uchechukwu Oga. I guess we can all relate to it. Then, what can you make of all this? Because the people involved are not just anybody. Because the people involved are high net worth individuals with political weight. You see, the way they treat men of timber and caliber cannot be the same way this category of people are treated. And this played out. No matter what we may teach our students about rule of law, equality before persons, but the manifestation in practice, we all know. So nobody is making this up. These are decisions of courts, from High Court to Court of Appeal, over a space of about 30, 40 years. So it's not something that has just started, okay? So soft landing, just to say, okay, we understand, but that is not the issue. Did he win or did he not win? I'm focused. And a lot of people will say, oh, equity looks at the substance, not the form. And then hail it, depending on which part of the divide are you. Now, what I've done here, ladies and gentlemen, is to look at arguments for the people, the protagonists. What are they saying? If we go to a debate now and we are saying this thing should be abolished, we don't expect any lawyer or anybody on the other side to say, oh, I agree with what the learned counsel has said. That doesn't take place. So now it's a strategy for widening the tax net. That is the first. They said, look, we need money, we need to diversify, we need to respond against the volatility, the prices of oil, and then the dwindling revenue. So it's a strategy. Then it is a constitutional imperative or requirement. Remember section 24F. Everybody say, I know you are a lawyer, you are an expert in constitutional law. If the constitution says everybody should pay, then if we say Shorty should bring TCC, why should you be against it? Is that a very strong argument? Yes, of course. Any argument that is anchored on the Constitution can only be ignored at once per year. They said it's proof that the surety is responsible. Oh, if you are paying your tax, it shows you are corporately responsible. You are socially responsible. Then it reinforces the identity, the address, and the traceability of the, oh, if you pay tax, then we are sure you are not a ghost. Because nobody will pay tax if there is no identifiable entity or taxpayer, whether corporate or individual. Now, what are the arguments against? There is no proof that it has significant impact on revenue. I would like to see that data that shows that because of this practice, this is what government is able to. You know, there are times you cut your nose to spite your face. So there is no evidence. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I've not seen it. Then section 24F, which I just spoke glowingly in favor, related to general duty of citizens. It's related to general duty of citizens. Okay. And has no specific bearing on bail conditions. Then TCC is issued upon demand and not automatic. So there are taxpayers who have never required TCC. There are people paying. Even when we engage with tax officials, I used to tell them, how many of you have ever obtained TCC? A majority really don't have any need for it. So the fact that a person does not have TCC does not mean that he's not paying his tax or that he's not responsible. Okay? So there are instances where those who have TCC are also required to top up. So there could be judges who will say, oh, how can somebody of this stature pay this amount? I say, no, they should go out. So, but who suffers when we have all these situations? Then section 28.5, section 85.2, as I pointed out, applies to MDAs or commercial banks. So by any stretch of imagination, I don't see how we can bring court into that situation. I don't see how we can bring court into that situation. Okay? Then delay, most of the transactions listed in section 85.4 are mostly required by high net worth individuals. In tax balance, it's a way of saying the upper class and the middle, the upper class and the middle class. Then there's usually delay in processing TCC. taxpayer is faced with take it or leave it option due to pressure. Although the Ondo State lawyers went to court and they were able to achieve their aim, but there are people who could have also paid and say, oh, if you have somebody in prison at that time, oh, 150,000, okay, have you go and take it. There is no right of appeal as we have it in Personal Income Tax Act. Once they say this is the amount you have to pay, you have to pay it. Then there is undue restriction of those who could stand as surety. Remember I said there are people, responsible people, who are paying their taxes, who, because of this policy or practice, cannot stand as sureties. Then it encourages procurement of TCC at Oluwole. By Oluwole here, I mean the black market. I mean places where they can produce tax clearance in a jiffy, depending on if you can pay for it. So you want tax clearance, they will tell you that we'll give you tax clearance, but the genuineness of what you have is a different ball game. Okay? Some findings. TCC is not a requirement for elective position anymore. There may be some of us who feel that it should be. How do you pretend over the treasury, over the public treasury, without proving that you are a taxpayer? Remember all the argument against Donald Trump during the American election. But yet, people still said they wanted him. Despite all the tax planning, I won't call it evasion. And during debate, Hillary Clinton was saying, oh, your tax record is very awful. And the man said, without any shame, that look, you are in the Senate, you are in the Congress. Your law, the law you make, allow me to do what I'm doing. You didn't put it there because of me. You put it there because of your friend and sponsors. So why should it bother you that I took advantage of it the same way that your friends and your sponsor also? So it's not a requirement in our law anymore. They are in the statute book, but the interpretation or the spin given to it by the courts, they are quite different. So the impact is felt more by the poor than the rich, especially at the magistrate court level. You know, at the magistrate court level, you have petty thieves, people involved in burglary, people who are just hungry and then social problem, and then they got their fingers burnt. The rich can always take care of themselves. And you can see that the bonds regulation, the framework for bonds is even trying to make it easier. So that if it's a question of money, you don't need to faint in court. One company will come to your rescue. You don't need a lawyer to even stand as sure. They will just call them the way you call service provider, the way you call a taxi, the way you call Uber, and they will fix it, and then you are off the hook. Oh, if you decide to jump bail, it is now their problem. And one of the highest consequences is that they can lose their certificate. There is no provision, to my mind, that somebody from the company will replace the person that has jumped bail. So maybe these are part of the reason why Lagos State has been slow in implementing it. The practice is a product of what I call, you see, if you are in academia, you have a license to say certain things. Okay, in this context, I call it overbearing influence of the executive on the heads of court. The practice is not in accordance with Section 85(2) and 4 of Peter. Remember, I'm not saying it's not in accordance with the law. Experts in criminal law or criminal justice administration could tell us that, oh, the discretionary power of the court is so wide that anything can come inside that pot or basket. Then, by the letters and spirit of Section 85, Peter, TCC should not apply to the informal sector. You know, I said you should note some of the critical legal concepts, fundamental legal concepts in Section 85. For example, assessment. Assessment is practically impossible in the informal sector because there is no record or no adequate record. And that's the reason why our law had now recognized taxation of the informal sector in form of presumptive tax. Although the regulation for that has not been made since 2011. So it sometimes plays out or applied in a manner that looks like an extortion. There are people who are falling within this scenario and situation, and they were causing. Imagine a situation where a vehicle breaks down on the highway, then the vehicle is carted to one of the MDAs, and then the victim is asked to go and pay certain amount of money. And as soon as they finish paying, they said there is a tax obligation also to be fulfilled. Depending on the circumstances of that person, you remember how deflated or how the pang of injustice in the heart of that type of the person. I say, God, doesn't it look like a double jeopardy? Or punishing somebody twice for the same offense. But those who are protagonists of these practices will always have something to say. Okay? No amendment of any tax law is required before any change in this regard can be made. All we need is an understanding and to continue this conversation. I don't think, in my view, that's why I consistently refer to it as the practice. It's not the law. It's like when we had the practice that women cannot act as sureties. It's not written in any law, but that practice continued. But the ACJ law of Lagos State now specifically provided against it. So when we had in our tax practice or tax administration space that women cannot claim certain allowances, it wasn't written in any tax law at that time. Just that some people who, based on their knowledge and honestly feel that that is what they should do in order to protect the revenue as gatekeepers. Oh, they said, Bayo Akinlade, we assume that you have claimed it. So if Mrs. Bayo Akinlade wants to claim, they'll just say, show us evidence that your husband has not claimed. So if your wife comes back and say, oh, we are sorry, he's out of the country, or give some other reason, they can then, why not vice versa? Why not asking the husband to also get consent from the wife before he can claim? Why not split it? So now, delay in criminal justice system has cost implication for the federal government prisons. For the federal government, prison being an item in the exclusive legislative list, item 48. When you keep more people in prison, you have to feed them, you have to provide for them. The infrastructure will be overstretched. So these are findings which a critical or a calm review of all these things will show. I'm getting to the end. The practice of, this is my conclusion, the practice of requiring TCC as a condition for accessing government services is pervasive. It's not just on application for bail. It's pervasive. It even includes doing business. As you can see under section 85.4, if you are applying for a government contract, you must have a TCC. There are people who have issues with the tax authority who cannot get TCC until those issues are resolved. If you were to be a taxman, you will say, oh, that is good. But a business person, oh, let me do my business. It is when I have money and I make revenue that I will be able to pay you when we resolve these issues finally. So some tax authority have devised a means of giving qualified TCC. And say, okay, we appreciate your concern, we appreciate your difficulty, we will give you a qualified TCC until this issue. So that, in a way, is a responsible response approach to this problem. But is it the solution? So I have done, so the practice, which is not in tandem with leading practice, is hurting the economy, is hurting individual, is hurting private interests. I have done the analysis in the context of suretyship to show that it is not supported by the tax law. And I make bold to say this with all emphasis at my disposal. Why there is no evidence that the practice is achieving its revenue objective, there is no gainsaying the fact that it is negatively implicates access to justice, fair hearing, right to liberty, and leads to extortion of citizens in emergency situation. And I recognize that these are the concerns of JRP, Integrity Organization, and people like Bio, who are acting in public interest. So there are enough safeguards to ensure that suretyship fulfills its objective as established in plethora of cases without an overkill of requirement of TCC. So I leave you with the following thoughts. If TCC is not required for election into public offices, why should it be required to bail someone who is presumed to be innocent? The man has not been convicted. Remember, I said the focus here is going to be on those awaiting trial. To what extent can this practice be justified under discretionary power to grant bail? Considering that one of the factors usually that a judge or a magistrate must consider is the probability that the accused will not jump bail. So that means before granting somebody bail, you have looked at him, has he been coming, this and that? So that had already been addressed to a large extent. Will he jump bail? Only God knows. He may not have the plan to jump bail, but certain things can happen to make him jump bail. Okay? So would the judiciary in Nigeria have developed this practice on its own? Recall my supposition that it could have been induced by some authority from above. But if we teach our students 3 arms of government and checks and balances, how can there be any authority from above dictating what is not rooted in law? So is this something that our magistrates and judges will be proud to showcase in international arena or international community as their unique contribution to administration of criminal justice? Can we beat our chest and say, oh, this started during my time? You see, internet doesn't forget. Those who didn't know the name of the CJ, the former CJ under which this started, we now say link his name to this inglorious practice. So what will happen if a magistrate or a judge decides to jettison this requirement? If I decide to jettison it, what will happen? Not many people will even dare. We must recognize that. So will the judiciary in Nigeria have developed, okay, Okay, I repeated that, sorry. Does the practice exist in countries with the highest tax to GDP ratio? The countries that are doing well, Denmark, Norway, do they have this type of practice? Certainly no. Okay. So please, I'm getting to the end. So this is my parting shot, and permit me to read it. I've done a paper at, interestingly, at the Old State Annual Chief Judge Seminar in 2019 on taxation as an instrument of social engineering. This was my closing shot at that. It is still very, very relevant. I would like to end this discourse by advocating deeper reflection on how to balance the competing rights of the government and taxpayer as government resort to new strategy in tax enforcement. Permit me to signpost the downside of making tax clearance certificate part of the condition for granting bail. While such a requirement might seem supportive of the revenue drive of government, it portends danger to the right of the subject, who may have to spend a few more days in custody on account of administrative bottleneck in obtaining a TCC where one is not readily available. A careful perusal of section 85.2 of PITA will reveal that the law had clearly prescribed the type of services that will require production of TCC. Going by the nature of those transactions, they are mostly required by high net worth individuals, that is the rich. It is difficult to reconcile the provision of section 85.2 PITA with suretyship, especially through administrative fiat. I hope and pray that the school enrollment or exercise of voting rights are not added to the list at some point when the requirement of TCC have fallen into disuse in other climes on account of modernization. So ladies and gentlemen, these are my thoughts. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience. Over to you, Bayo and Efemina.
Thank you very much, Prof. This is very enlightening, and it has put a very good perspective on what we're here for. So this is what is going to happen. I know there are a few people who want to say one thing or the other. Just put your hands up and you'll be recognized. The conversation series is a conversation freely. Whatever you say would not be, if you're from government, it shouldn't be regarded as a position of government. So please speak freely, because we're here to change the way we do things. And it helps all of us to ensure that we have a better Nigeria and we have a better way of doing things, at least in the legal space. So thank you once again, Prof. So like I said, if you want to ask a question, you want to make a comment, please just raise up your hands and then we'll call on you and then you can unmute yourself. But specifically speaking, if there's any other tax experts here, please, would like you to say one or two things. I don't know if Dr. Akin Bello is here because he has a deeper understanding on the issue of the bondsmen. Just in case some of us do not know, we have a provisions for bondsmen in Lagos State, but for some reason, we do not know why it is not being implemented. So anytime Dr. Kimbelo comes in, I think he can just take the floor. Otherwise, may I call our Leonard Silk, Mrs. Funke Adekoya, if she is the chairman of the board of JRP, and just want her to have a few comments here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bayo, for inviting me to speak. And thank you very much, Prof, for a very stimulating conversation. Whilst I'm not sure that I'm in total agreement with you, that the requirements by magistrates for a tax clearance certificate is not supported by the law, because you have highlighted the provisions of legislation that seems to say, or in any other case where it is so required. I do agree with you that the provision or the request for tax clearance certificates really does not enhance the bail process. If anything, it probably leads to an avenue of extortion by sureties, police, prosecutors who have to approve sureties before it gets to the magistrate. I would therefore be suggesting that if tax clearances or payment of tax is to ensure that sureties are persons who exist and are not ghost workers, then that provision should be listed, and I believe it is listed in the Lagos State Practice Direction of many years ago for bondsmen, and put the burden on the bondsmen to ensure that the accused show up in court for the dates of their trial. I would listen, I would wish to listen to other speakers on this topic. Unfortunately, I have another client commitment set up for 4 o'clock. So I'm going to have to drop off now and look forward to going over the recording. But I think that raising revenue should not be the priority of government. I think building an economy upon which revenue can be based on tax should be the priority of the government. So I do not support tax clearance as a requirement for bail. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard Silk. So can we move on and have anyone else who would like to say 1 or 2 things, and then we can call Professor Sanni back to just take more comments, questions, and give some answers. So, okay, I can see Ms. Teju Shomori, please, you have the floor. Unmute yourself, then after that, Mr. Shakuru Omolaja can come up.
Good afternoon, thank you very much. My name is Professor Teju Shomori. I'm a retired coordinating director from FRS. I'm currently the Dean of College of Postgraduate Studies at Caleb University. I want to speak on some tax issues. First of all, I want to commend Professor Sanni for bringing this to fore, because I don't think I've listened to any discourse on the issue of tax clearance certificate before. So this is quite welcome. Tax clearance certificate was introduced into Nigeria in 1974. And since it was introduced, from the point of view of Federal Inland Revenue Service, I want to go against the recommendation or the comment made by Professor Sanni, arguments against the practice of TCC. He said that there's no proof that it has been significant, that there's any significant impact on the revenue generation. I'd like to suggest that there should be a study on that before we can make this kind of statement. Because I know during the time I was working in FRS, tax clearance certificate has actually, and it's still doing so, it has widened revenue collection, not only at the federal level, also at the state level as well. So that is my point number 1. Then point number 2 on the issue of presumptive tax, that there is no regulation yet on presumptive tax. So I'd like Professor Sanni to just look at this. Maybe from the legal point of view, maybe there's already a legislation. If you look at paragraph 6 of the Personal Income Tax Amendment Act of 2011, there was a section introduced as subsection 6 to section 36 under ascertainment of total income to the Principal Act. The section reads as follows: notwithstanding any of the provisions and so on and so forth, where all practical purposes the income of the taxpayer cannot be ascertained or records not kept in such a manner, all this one is talking about informal tax, would enable proper assessment of income. Then, my emphasis starts from here, then such a taxpayer shall be assessed on such terms and conditions as will be prescribed by the minister and regulations by order of Gazette under a presumptive tax regime. So I'd like Professor Sanni to enlighten more whether there's actually a legislation on a presumptive tax regime. Then looking at my last point is about Companies Income Tax Act, CITA, on tax clearance certificate. Both CITA and PITA, they have similar sections. Under section 101, that is where you have, of CITA, that is where you have areas to require for procurement of tax clearance certificate. There are some that are listed here that I think there should be a second look at it. Under Companies Income Tax Act, there's a requirement to procure TCC for application for distributorship, application for allocation of market stores. I think that shouldn't be under Companies Income Tax Act. It should appropriately be under personal income tax because issue of market stores, and then that of application for distributorship, and also registration as contractor. Any contractor, it can come under limited liability company. But those two, distributorship as well as allocation of market stores, maybe government needs to take a second look at that in respect of maybe there's going to be an amendment and then take it away from under CITA and let it only remain under personal income tax act. Those are the points I want to make. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Somioni. I think the question that I'm going to throw back at you respectfully is, and this is something you think about and then come back and let us know your thoughts, is whether the TCC is should be a requirement, from a surety, standing bail for a suspect. And this is the basic problem that we're trying to discuss here, whether or not that is relevant. So I'm going to come back to you, then have a thought about that. Okay, yeah, please.
Because I want to do other things. In my view, as somebody that has done quite some work in taxation, I think it should be a requirement for surety. Because why I said that is that it should be somebody responsible to be allowed to stand in for another. So somebody that is that has discharged his responsibility, constitutional responsibility under Section 24 would have paid his or her taxes. So the demand for tax clearance certificate to allow somebody to do that practice, I think is a welcome requirement in my view, because not just anybody will now be allowed to stand in for another. It shows that the person is responsible by discharging your responsibility under the law.
Okay, thank you very much. But I would still come back to you when we give you the scenarios of what we face daily in court. So Mr. Shakiri Omolaraja, please.
Yes, thank you, moderator. This is my view, please. I think we must be brutally honest with ourselves. For me, the requirement of TCC in bail administration is a no, no, no. We should not forget the aim of what we're discussing, increasing the congestion. We know statistically that all over the country, the number of awaiting trial men outweighs seriously those who have actually been convicted. And if we are working with the theory, that constitutional theory that every accused person is presumed innocent until the otherwise is established, then we ought to think outside the box of revenue generation. Like Professor Sanni said, tying revenue generation to the administration of justice might, at the end of the day, be a great injustice. He has given us fantastic examples of countries that have the highest returns from tax payments, not necessarily because they have tied this to their administration of justice. For me, I am saying we should have a means of persuading the judiciary that this is more of service to humanity than revenue generation. Like the learned son, Funke Adekoya said, we should think of creating employment improving the economy before we think of taxation. So for me, and I'm concluding now, I am urging all of us, the speakers, to submit their papers, the conclusion of their papers to the judiciary. The highlights, like the last speaker before I came in, I do not agree with her with due respect. Like Bayo, like you said very brilliantly, lawyers who are involved with administration of criminal justice, processing bail, we know what we face daily. The process is dehumanized. That's the least way I can describe it. The process is dehumanized, leading to extreme corruption. And I think I've written 1 or 2 letters to the CJ on this. We must consciously and with courage take away that practice. Why do we want to say a person is only responsible in the society only when the person starts? It may be one of the indices of knowing that, oh, he's a responsible citizen. There should be other factors, like being a community leader, a religious leader, a worthy man in the society. But the payment of tax should not be the only the only index or the only pointer where we can say, oh, this person can be released. Thank you very much for the time you have given me. And I must say this, I am really impressed by the caliber of contributors, the spokespersons, the resource persons who have spoken to this discussion today. I am really impressed. And I say kudos to the organizers. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I see one of our JLP people has his hands up, so please go ahead.
Mr. Bayo, it's me. I just wanted to just add to the conversation, you know, it's very interesting. And I'm just going to follow up from what Mr. Omolaja and Professor Shomorin said, you know, and for me, just in terms of lawmaking, the question is, why is the TCT a requirement in the first place? Professor Sanni seemed to, I think Professor Sanni mentioned that is it to identify the surety, and you know, Professor Shomorin did say it shows that the person is responsible. But I think from either perspective, and if there's more, I'd like to be corrected, but from either perspective, there are reasonable alternatives that can make, you know, securing bail a lot easier in the interest of justice. And I understand that payment of tax is a constitutional obligation, but then the fundamental right upon which bail is founded itself is a constitutional obligation as well that must be accorded equal recognition. So in my opinion, you know, just taking from the last 2 contributors, it does seem to me like there could be alternatives to these conclusions. And from the responsible point of view, particularly because in Nigeria, I think the social reality is that many people are still outside the tax net. So for the purpose of doing justice, it may be helpful to acknowledge that flaw and say to ourselves, we can't make TCC a requirement because even in Nigeria, payment of taxes is cultural, it's still not, you know, a thing yet. So people could be responsible, but for many reasons, including poverty, they may not be taxpayers, you know, or even if for informal earnings, they may not be taxpayers. So I guess that ends my submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Efemi. That's brilliant. Max, you have something to say?
Yes, much, Bayo. Let me thank the conveners of this forum, and of course, thank the learned prof for a very stimulating and very enlightening discussion. So I just want to come in from the point, because amongst other things I practice within the area of technology law. So privacy and data protection is one of my core areas of concern. So I want to raise an issue from that angle. That just like the prof mentioned the case of Donald Trump. Donald Trump, you know, there's a lot of accusations against him in terms of his issues of his tax records. But you could see that because of the strength of privacy law and data protection law, nobody has been able to pry his tax clearance certificate or records, as it were, out of him. Because when it comes to your tax records, these are really highly confidential information. And a lot of times, with due respect to our courts, you know, documents are handled flippantly. And then we are also aware that by general principles of law, any document that gets into the court file becomes a public document and is available to the inspection of the public. So by insisting that people produce their tax clearance, we are also, in a sense, you know, violating the privacy of those people. Because by the moment you make your tax clearance available to the court, then it becomes a public record. So I would say I fully agree, Prof, that tax clearance should not, for any reason at all, be a requirement for bail. But if it must be, then the courts need to go further and make a clear regulation to ensure that the confidentiality of those tax records are protected. That the fact that I release my tax records, the records of the court, are available for public inspection. So I just thought to add that angle as well. Thank you very much. Bye.
Fantastic. I like that approach as well. So I'll go back to Professor Somari and then conclude with Professor Sanni and ask again, Professor Somari, you are expert as well, an academic, and you've worked with the Federal Inland Revenue Service. So in light of the fact that and a suspect is brought to court and then he says, oh, you need to present 2 sureties with tax clearance. This is at 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, how do you think that the sureties can get, number one, get the tax clearance before the close of work that same day? And what if the person is a wheelbarrow driver who was picked up on the road by the police? Do you think that a wheelbarrow driver or a low-class citizen will be able to produce, they said produce a surety with tax clearance? I mean, do you think it's realistic that somebody who is poor can produce 2 sureties with tax clearance? Do you think this is practicable? Professor Somari. Okay, maybe she'll come back to us. So, Professor Sanni, this is the same thing I'm going to throw at you because this is this is what we face on a daily basis. If at 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the suspect is being told, go and get 2 sureties with tax clearance.
I'm on, please.
Okay. So like I said, yeah, so like I said, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yes,
yeah,
I get your
so
you know where
if he doesn't produce them, they go to jail. And they will stay in jail until they produce the sureties.
I had your questions. The problem in Nigeria is because 90% of Nigerians, or if not more, they are not compliant when it comes to paying taxes. They don't pay their taxes.
But can they afford to pay taxes?
Why should somebody wait until it is when you need a tax clearance that you should procure it? If you make it a habit and you procure your tax clearance certificate as it should be, then anytime you need to present it for anything, whether it's a surety or for whatever, the certificate is already there. Then if everybody is paying his or her taxes, it shouldn't be a problem to get somebody to stand in as surety. But the problem with Nigerians is what I have just told you. People, until they are forced, they don't like to pay taxes. And one of the reasons why tax clearance certificate was introduced in 1974 is because government noted that a lot of people were not paying taxes. Since it was introduced first at the federal level and then to the states, it has increased tax revenue generation in Nigeria, all over. And it was made clear that tax clearance certificate is procurement should not be punitive. It's not punitive. The problem is that we should encourage Nigerians to pay their taxes as when they're supposed to pay. If everybody pays when you are supposed to pay, then already you have your tax clearance certificate. So anytime you are called upon, you just produce it. You don't have to wait. That is my own point of view. But we Nigerians, how many people on this forum have their current tax clearance certificate? How many? I don't wait until I pay my own. January, by February of every year, I pay my taxes and get my tax clearance certificate ever ready. Anytime I need it, I present it. The problem is that you can never get people to present TCC because they have not paid their taxes. That is the simple truth.
Thank you very much, Prof. Let me add that there is no requirement for the suspect to produce a tax clearance certificate. So that's probably something we should also look at, because if the person that needs sureties with tax clearance is not even required to present a tax clearance himself, then maybe we need to really review the whole process. So I'll go back to Professor Sanni and then he can round up.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Bayo. And let me appreciate all the commentators for their intervention. I'm particularly happy to have Professor Teju Shomori, my namesake. We work together on so many things at the national level. So I'll come to the questions shortly, but let me fill a gap in the presentation. I didn't talk about the recommendation. Apparently, the slide, the PowerPoint that I uploaded omitted that part. So let me speak to this in 2-3 minutes. Then I come to the intervention by the LANESIC, Mrs. Adekoya, and others. So I have 3 recommendations. I don't believe in long recommendations. If my students present their seminars in class and they have 13 recommendations, I'll just tell them right away that they can't be useful recommendations. So I've streamlined everything to just 3. The first one, stakeholders should practically promote an amendment to section 85(2) and subsection 4 out of abundant caution, in line with the approach of section 118 subsection 3 of ACJ law of Lagos State as a response to denial of suretyship by women. You know, I've said that this is not a matter of law, and I maintain that position. I'm not saying it may not be a matter under another branch of law, but as far as law of taxation is concerned, I've been teaching taxation for almost 3 decades now, and I'm not teaching nonsense. So, because it's also a practice that women cannot act as sureties. It wasn't written in the constitution, it wasn't written in any, but out of abundant caution, the lawmakers in Lagos said, let's put it here, at least to put pay to this nonsense. And I'm saying, Finance Act is going to be out again very soon. The JRP and then Integrity Organization GT and people like Bio should now follow up and make sure that they propose an amendment to section 85(2)(4) to leave nothing in doubt about what we are talking about. And I said should practically. What do I mean? It's not just talk about, I'm even almost tired of talking about so many things without action. I mean, we don't just talk about it, we also follow up. And how do you follow up? The people in Abuja, the language they understand is that, what do you want us to do? This is it. We want you to amend section 85. What are your reasons for it? This is the reason. What are the justifications? These are the justifications. This is the bill I want you to promote on my behalf, or this is the clause I want inserted. I will be happy to work with JRP and other stakeholders in this regard. Then there should be a sustained conversation. We have just started. And I'm happy Professor Shomori, an accomplished tax administrator and scholar, she said, look, this is perhaps the first time I'm listening to, she has delivered hundreds of papers at fora, excellent, brilliant papers. She said, look, I'm a bit ahead because I've spoken to on this issue where I brought it in because I also share the passion of criminal lawyers who said it wasn't the issue mainly, but I just felt since I'm talking to magistrates, I'm talking to the judges, and the CJ was there and I was a special guest. When you bring somebody as a special guest, you feel he has a message. And I seized the moment and I said, let us stop this nonsense. Okay? So there should be a sustained conversation with heads of courts. I don't think there's any head of court here. Let JRP put an event together where you have the CJ, where the ideas can clash. And they can say, oh, Prof, what you are talking about is straight from the classroom. We don't believe it. Then I can go back and also look at it again and say, okay, perhaps I'm wrong. No point pontificating. So because if the CJ issues a circular today, this practice will stop tomorrow. Okay, that is the second suggestion. The third one is PEBEC. PEBEC is Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council. They should interrogate the effect of the requirement of TCC as a condition for doing business in Nigeria. I know tons of taxpayers who are compliant, but I also know some who are compliant but who have issues on account of which they have not been issued TCC. And the implication is that they can't do business. I know a taxpayer who said for a whole year he could not do any business because his papers are not correct. You see, government should realize that it is a silent partner in every business. If you ground a business down or you close it down, you are hurting yourself. Okay, if money is due from government, the appropriate response is not to deny that organization the right to do business or the opportunity to do business. Rather, government should look for how to enable businesses. That is what they do in other clients. They support them. And that is why during COVID, during challenges, they give them grants. They tell them, don't retrench, we will support you with grants. Because when the going was good, we also took part of it. And now that it is bad, we are giving you this support. This is the kind of, I said, PEBEC should interrogate it and then look at it whether it is actually helping to grow the economy. I don't have the data, but as an intellectual, I just know that it's doing more harm than good. Okay? And I now come to the questions. Let me stop sharing. Okay. So let me now go to the questions one by one. Mrs. Adekoya. Mrs. Adekoya, of course, if somebody at our level says something, we have to take it seriously. She said, oh, she doesn't agree with me. But I'm happy she didn't say that she disagreed with my analysis as far as the position of the tax law is concerned. Okay, she said, oh, it appears there is this stipulation in some other laws. The scope of my intervention didn't cover all other laws. This is the only aspect. Not that we also don't know other laws, but this is the only aspect where I can speak authoritatively. And I say, look, I've looked at it, I've analyzed it, I've shown it to you. You know, the scope does not cover courts, okay? Then if we see that type of law exists anywhere, and I'm happy that she said that it's also doing more damage than good. So we should put it in the cart, put it in the basket for amendment, okay? So now, she spoke about the requirement of TCC for bondsmen. This is different. Remember, bondsmen are business people. They are people who saw opportunities, who felt that, look, we could sanitize all this charge and bail practice. Rather than the registrar of the courts calling on people to go, the same people who are acting as sureties or guarantors today, tomorrow, they say, well, we can set up a business around this and then make money. So if TCC is required for them to, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, but the focus of our discussion is TCC as a requirement for suretyship. Now, I come to Professor Shomori now. Okay, she said that we should investigate, and I agree, there is nothing wrong, especially when the conversation is just starting. If we have data, we can speak specifically to data. But remember, the position I said is that I doubt if it has significantly advanced the objective of revenue because it has never featured in recent budget speeches or as a line item in any government expenditure or revenue profile that I've seen. I'm not saying that government is not getting something. I said, and I repeat, it could be a case of cutting our noses to spite our faces. Okay? Now, Professor Shomori spoke about Federal Inland Revenue Service and provision of CETA. With due respect, ma, the focus of our engagement here has to do with personal income tax, which is administered by states. Okay? It has to do with personal income tax. Now, when you deny a company opportunity to do business because of TCC, there is no issue of bail, issue of fundamental right or liberty at stake. There could be issue of economic losses, which may also be as important as life and limb. So the focus, maybe because Prof is a federal, worked as a federal tax administrator. She has all the tax issues from the federal perspective, but this is a bottom issue. In fact, we are looking at it more in the context of requirement at the magistrate level, where the poor, the rich can always take, if they say a big man should go and bring somebody who has houses abroad, majority of them will arrange it.
Okay.
So that's not the focus of this engagement, okay? So to a large extent, we agree with that. Then on presumptive tax, Prof wanted me to enlighten the audience on whether no regulation has been made. Yes, the position is that no regulation has in fact or indeed been made. In 2011, Section 36 was amended to say that there will now be a presumptive tax. But even that provision of Section 36 says there should be a regulation gazetted by the minister. Up till now, the minister has not made any regulation. And what presumptive tax is all about for the sake of those who are non-tax people is that, look, personal income tax requires formal requirements. It requires keeping of records. It requires documenting certain things so that we ascertain your income. We now begin to take or to deduct certain expenditure and all that. There are certain reliefs. Personal income tax assumes that everybody knows all this, which is another fallacy. Majority of our people are ignorant about how these things work. And in 2011, the lawmakers came to this realization and said, oh, you know what? Taxation of informal sector poses some unique challenges. And what should we do? Don't ask them to bring all those documents. Just look at their circumstances and say, the lodgers come and pay this amount. The people in Owode pay this amount. But bear in mind, Lagos State started doing this almost 15 years ago, before 2011. Because Lagos State, when Fowler was there and the subsequent administrator, they realized that if they apply personal income tax the way it is, they won't get anything from the informal sector. Because of their creativity, because of the force of their intellect, they recognize the limit of what they can do. Even when there was no presumptive tax regulation, they went to the market, organized them into a more efficient structure, and then tell them, do some tax education. And that is what LRS is still doing. They promoted the concept of taxpayers' money in action, and people started responding. Not because of regulation, man. There is no regulation. I have all the tax regulations here, which I've compiled in this book. Now, the only regulations on personal income tax we have so far are 3. Okay, the one on pay as you earn, the one on withholding tax regulation, and the one on exemption to the international staff of African Union Commission. That had even become obsolete, but it's still in the tax law. So that is that relating to Prof, my learned, my namesake. Thank you very much, Ma, for your thoughts. Now, then Bio asks a direct question, which Prof now said that, oh, it's an evidence of responsibility. What I would just say to it, Ma, is that recall that even it is not a requirement to ascend to the #1 throne, #1 political office in Nigeria. It's not a requirement anymore to become a senator. It's not a requirement anymore to be in the House of Rep. Are you saying people in all those places are not responsible? And you put a question and say, oh, not everybody in this on this call we have TCC. Let's assume that is true. Are you saying, Ma, with due respect, honestly, you believe that those people are not responsible? We are bound to have divergent of views. With due respect, I don't share that view. And I've said that, look, it is no longer the current thinking. It's no longer the current approach. It is anachronistic. It is antiquated. It is antediluvian. It is something that is old and should be consigned to this bin. Which taxes TCC are they asking people to show in England or in Britain or in US? Once they have your INI number or they have your national security number, they have all your details. I'm happy that we have a technology expert here, Max. I even thought Max wanted to say that, look, there are better ways of tracking people than saying bring TCC. If what you want to do is to make sure that you get them, there are better ways. Okay? Now, that is my honest. Then Shakiru Omolaja, you have done my paper for me. In fact, practically we did this paper together because you are on point and you are more eloquent than I can ever be. You said it is a no, no, no. I pray I could speak powerfully like you. You said, look, judges should see their role as service to humanity. And when I see them, if I have the opportunity to address conference of heads of court, I'm going to ask them, Operation Show your TCC. So if you don't have your TCC on the spot, you could also fall into this type of trap. How many people? What is TCC, for God's sake? I look forward to a day when it will be blotted out of our tax law. Okay, so thank you so much, Shakiru Omolaja. Then somebody spoke, I didn't get the name. Maybe it is Mr. Candidate Johnson from his accent, but I didn't get the name. Then
it's a femina that spoke, I think.
Oh, it's a femina.
Your student, okay. Yeah.
A femina, you want to be. Anyway, you see, that is the way we train our students. They bring fresh things to the table. What I just want to say is, a femina, I'm not in support of this requirement. And if you take a look at what I've said, if you have the slide, you can go through it again. I'm not an advocate of TCC. Okay. Now, relating to your comment on, duty to pay tax in chapter 2. You see, duty to pay tax is in chapter 2, and you know that section 66C of the Constitution says even chapter 2 is not enforceable. Whereas right to liberty, fair hearing, and presumption of innocence, they are in chapter 4. They are constitutionally entrenched. And what are fundamental rights? What makes fundamental rights fundamental is the fact that they are entrenched in the Constitution. Okay? So we have all these other constitutional imperatives in a superior part of the Constitution, which are enforceable. So to that extent, then Marx said that issues of privacy, in the context of Donald Trump, while you are right that there are certain things that taxpayer may not want to share with the tax authority, as far as income tax is concerned, it's a duty. Income tax requires transparency. you are supposed to come before the tax authority and sing like canary on all you have ever made. It's not cultural. It's not in tandem with what we ordinarily want to do. If God has blessed me, I won't want the next person to know. You understand? The Yorubas, they say that if your yam has grown phenomenally, you have to cover it. So nobody wants to go before any tax authority and say, oh, God is good. This is how much I made. You know, the Romans don't want any officer to come and be breathing on their neck. Bring this, bring that. And that's why the Romans said, don't tax me. Tax the next person. They will ship or export taxation to their colonies or to the vassals. A baron under the Roman Empire will not come and be talking and say, bring this, bring your account, bring this and that. They don't want it. But as the law stands, it is a duty. But in the context of Donald Trump, what I think is the sticky point for me is the breach of tradition. You know, for the past 45 years or so, every American president will display their annual return and share it with public, not as a matter of law. If you Google it and say tax return of past American president, if you want to see that of Joe Biden, I'm sure it will pop up. I've never tried. But Trump has the inglorious record of being the first president in America who didn't share. And I use that to also argue that, look, it's not really a requirement to aspire to occupy the #1 political office. Not even in America. He didn't say, where is your tax clearance? And even if he has shown one personally, if you go by the jurisprudence in Nigeria, nobody can query how much he paid, even if he paid just 1 naira. So it becomes a situation of tax or like consideration, which not be adequate. I mean, all we need to do is that you pay something symbolically. So is that a serious system? Okay, so that is the, now, I've spoken, Professor Shomoni at the last, spoke last. TCC is not just fashionable anymore. We need to look forward. We need to look forward. You need to take, if you look at the national tax policy, which I had the privilege of being the chairman, part of the principles we stated in that short but mighty document, I call it short but mighty document, is that, look, we should have KPIs to move our tax system forward and make it at least the first 50 in a couple of years. But unfortunately, there are certain things that will not make that to happen. When we talk about this in the international arena, we portray our tax system like a jungle. And that is why I posed the question to judges. I said, I'm magistrate, how many of you can beat your chest and show this when you get to international forum and say, this is what we are doing in Nigeria, and I'm an advocate of it. So ladies and gentlemen, we must acknowledge that there are bound to be divergent views. I'm not speaking as if I'm a reservoir of knowledge in this area. I'm just a student of taxation, learning, interacting, and taking back what I learned to my students. So the whole essence of what we are saying is that at the end of the day, after a long time, somebody might just say something that we can connect with and then move our law forward. So the most important thing for me is JRP should talk to organize something where we can escalate it to a higher level and talk to the right audience. Not that this is not right. I mean, decision maker who on Monday, we can even draft a circular and say, my Lord, if you are convinced with what you are doing, This is the circular. All you need to do is read it. You don't need the approval of the governor to sign it. So when we are fighting for independence of judiciary, we don't want, we have already said no to a system where the governor will be dictating to the head of court. If the governor comes with a proposal and then the head of judiciary feels that it's doing more harm than good, all we need to do is to provide and support with all the arguments to say no. If a superior writes a memo to even a junior can say, oh, with due respect, boss, I hope you will reflect on this and this and this and this. And at the end of the day, if the superior sees that the junior is making sense, the superior can follow the suggestions of the. So I'm not by any means suggesting that the judiciary is inferior to the executive, God forbid, but we shouldn't behave as if we are. And if there are practices that we have tolerated in the past, now that everybody is saying independence of judiciary, then this is the right time to throw this into the garbage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. And with that, we come to the end. Over to you, Efemina.
Thank you, Professor Sanni, and thank you to all the contributors. Thank you, Professor Shomorin, Mr. Shakir Omolaja, I can't remember all the names, Maxi Kongwe, and everybody who contributed. I think we all agree. And Professor Sanni, I was actually agreeing with you, saying, that even though it's a duty, that even the duty to pay taxes is sort of subordinate to the fundamental right to personal liberty. So I agree with you. I was just trying to make that comprehension and suggesting that we look for alternatives. So we take all the views that have been made. What we did after the last open conversation series was to set up working groups. We just inaugurated the first working groups yesterday from July, even because we had a long process sorting out volunteer applications. What we'll do is to take down notes from this session, synthesize them into actionable points, then set up working groups. And we hope to be able to come back to Professor Sanni or Professor Shomorin for their comments so we can put something together and then put this to the stakeholders who will make decisions. Mr. Bayo will obviously drive that process. Since this is an area he's significantly interested in. I'd just like to say thank you for coming. Ms. Adekoya is not here. She typically would have given the closing remarks. I'm trying to see if any of our other management team members are here, but I doubt. Mr. Bayo, would you do the closing remarks and thank people for coming, or would you want me to do that?
I'll just say thank you, everybody, and I will pursue all the things that has been discussed here with the judiciary, not only in Lagos State, but across the Federation. But as Professor Sanni did say, it's still an open conversation, and we'll be working closely with Professor Sanni to get some reforms in this area, because as Mr. Shakir Omolaja has said, if you go to Ikoyi prisons now, you have 300 convicted, and then you have 1,000 and so plus people awaiting trial. And when you find out why are they there awaiting trial, it's very likely that because they do not have shorties, and those shorties, or some shorties, don't have taxes. So we need to reduce those numbers drastically. Thank you very much once again, everyone.
All right, thank you so much. You can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, JRP Nigeria. It's a not-for-profit, so we run on donations and member support, so we'll take all the support we can get. Thank you so much for showing up. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Professor Sanni, again. And we'll stay in touch. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely...
Your pleasure is mine. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.